Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo, and we're waiting to connect with Professor Anthony Gonzales. Is he on? Well, we're trying to connect. We don't know. We don't know. Is he on? All right. Okay.
Hello.
So let's bring him on.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry we had that problem. And let's talk to him a little bit. Good morning, Professor Gonzales. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Dr. Tawari?
Good. I haven't seen you for a long time. I know we communicate from time to time, but we haven't been in touch. But how are you doing? You watching what's happening all over the world and thinking about it, I hope?
Yeah. Yes. Well, in my normal day's activities, I try to monitor things and see what's going on and do a bit of reading on some of these events. So I tend to try to keep a handle on some of these things. Of course, it's difficult to cover a large range of them, but at the same time, I think I cover those that I consider important to me and to probably the region.
Well, whenever I read anything or I look at anything, I always do it standing in the shoes of Trinidad and Tobago and the Caribbean region. So I look at everything from that point of view, that standpoint, and I try to understand, and I'm sure you do the same, try to understand, well, what are ultimately going to be the implications for this part of the world and this country. I also look at it with an eye for developing countries. What are the implications for developing countries and for the inequities that attend the evolution of the world system over the last 500 years, and especially since the Industrial Revolution in the 19th century. So we think about those things, but I mean, we have to make sense of what is happening now. When you look at what's happening in the world system, what are some of the things that jump out at you as being important?
Well, there are a broad range of things that are happening out there. It's difficult to make full sense of them. I think, first of all, we're seeing a kind of world disorder, but we're not able to properly define it. Came out of the Cold War at the end of 1992. We came out with a different kind of arrangement, and with one lone superpower, and that brought about some kind of stability. But let me just back up and say the world before that was probably a bit more stable, because you had two giants squaring off, and they more or less ordered the world in a certain way. But you began to see the breakdown of countries. You began to see the rise of nationalism, the rise of regionalism. Regional powers began to strike out, as you saw in Iraq and Iran and a number of them. And to some extent, that trend started to continue, and it was complemented by the war on global terror. That is to say, the transnational groups now, terrorist groups, began to make their mark on the international system. They proved that they could win asymmetric wars and they could do serious damage even to large powers. And so you had, in that kind of setting, along with the traditional issues of denuclearization and trying to regulate large powers and medium powers, you had that new phenomenon coming about small powers, let's call them small powers, small regional powers, and nuclear weapons, trying to extend their influence in regions where they feel they should have some kind of hegemony. And that more or less has continued up to today, you see, because we have a whole range. If you look at the current situation right now, if you go through the Middle East, for example, and you look at a lot of the wars that are going on there, and the role these mid-sized powers are playing, Iran is playing, Egypt is playing, Turkey, for example, just because they're now intervening in places like Libya and all in Africa and so on. Even in Ethiopia currently, you have some new players there like the United Arab Emirates and others and so forth, and all in Yemen and so forth. These mid-sized powers are coming out and playing a much more significant role as the large powers have tended to retreat. See, as America tended to withdraw its forces around the world, came to the realization it couldn't police the world. There was a kind of vacuum being created, and you see these kind of middle powers beginning to step in. And when they step in, is because there's more disorder than order, because you have, they come and back various factions in the country. You see it clearly in Libya, you see it in Yemen, you see it in Ethiopia now, who is backing the Tigray faction, who is backing the government, and in a different set of mid-range powers are doing that. So it's a kind of chaotic world. It's not the world that we had planned for and had hoped that the United Nations would be able to regulate. And this is where the difficulties are coming in. And I haven't mentioned really, I more or less concentrated on the interstate actors. But alongside these actors, you have a whole range of very powerful non-state actors that have risen with tremendous power. All these all organized crime, all these various groups that are demanding some kind of attention and controlling territory, paramilitary groups in various parts of the world, all in Latin America, right next to us here, in Colombia and Venezuela and so on, you have them. So it's a kind of chaotic world. It's very difficult to regulate, and this is why you find that the United Nations is not having much influence. And the call for regulation is full by a number of countries who do not think it is in their interest to have the United Nations intervene in things which they believe could be better regulated, of course, by them and in their interest. So what we have is basically the search by these middle powers to establish what we may call regional hegemony. You have Iran wanting to establish a kind of hegemony in that part of the world in the Middle East, and it is being countered by Saudi Arabia. So a battle is going on there between them. You have other middle powers in the region, and when I say middle powers, sometimes I sometimes should say that you have even smaller states who one would not regard as a middle power, but they are significantly powerful to have some influence, like the United Arab Emirates, and they are able to buy weapons significantly from big powers, and they're able to influence some local conflicts in the region. So, for example, Africa is becoming really a theater of a lot of these low-level conflicts, for want of a better term, where you have a lot of factional fighting going on over a whole host of things: territory, water, land, and different things that divide these various ethnic groups. So it's a very difficult situation. It is very ungovernable in many ways, and I don't know clearly how we go about resolve it. I think there's a feeling somehow that there's a role for regional organizations, organizations like the OS or the OAU in Africa and so on. And they can be assisted by certain large powers. But the idea seems to be that you need to promote these regional bodies to try and do the work to bring some kind of stability to these regions. But this is where I would leave it in terms of generally trying to describe the kind of world disorder that is emerging out.
No, I think you gave us a panoramic perspective there, and you're right. With the retreat of the United States as the world's policeman, you have basically a vacuum being created, and vacuums are filled. That's the nature of it. It's like putting your hand in a bucket and spinning the water and seeing a hole, and by the time you pull your hand out, the water is level again. And that's the reality of politics and power. And those issues are going to continue. But I want to focus your mind a little bit on the geopolitics of the big powers. The way this thing is going, I mean, there's no question that the United States faces a challenge to remain one of the most competitive big countries in the world, one of the most innovative, and one of the most scientific and technologically advanced. They are facing a challenge which they are trying to address now in terms of economic renewal and in terms of investment in science, technology, and innovation. China, on the other hand, is at a point now where it has achieved such significant advance that it is a competitor for world domination in terms of its influence on investment and trade and the logistics of transportation of goods and the provision of services. And it is a major player in the world. There's no question about that. And likely at the current trajectory levels to, in fact, become the dominant player in the world. And you have a situation in which Russia, under Putin, is unhappy that the Soviet Union basically collapsed with the fall of the Berlin Wall and really wants to make Russia a world power once more and to regain the respect that Russia once had and to play a strong geopolitical role in the world system. Do you think the way these tensions are emerging is good for the world system? And don't you think that perhaps, well, I mean, would you consider that another approach that is less tension-ridden might be more desirable? Let's deal with that big geopolitical question of the three big powers first.
Yes, there's certainly a need to try to get some kind of, if you call it entente or understanding among these larger, these world powers, in particular Russia, China, and the United States. Now, obviously, with the rise of China, it is clear that China has become a major competitor with the United States. It is going to surpass the United States in a few years, and then it will probably catch up with the United States not too far from there in terms of military strength. It will not probably become a dominant military power, because if we look at the distance they have to travel to reach there, it's quite far. And they have not really shown any major ambitions to be a world dominant strategic power. There are, of course, China's search for naval bases around the world. You know, we should talk about the ports they're acquiring, and some of these ports are strategic for the navy that they're building. They're certainly building a navy. And I recently saw a piece where Equatorial Guinea is probably the first country that China has identified where they want to establish a naval base in the Atlantic. Now, my impression of China is that what they're probably trying to do is to kind of hegemony in their region, in their immediate, their region is their immediate concern. Insofar as they're surrounded by the United States and the Western powers, let's not forget that the United States is in Japan, Okinawa base, the Americans are in South Korea. In all these areas, they have sizably military bases with the presence of nuclear weapons there. And they have, next, not far from them, there's Australia that is part of the alliance with the United States. China tends to think that historically they have been disadvantaged. There are parts of China that were taken away, and Taiwan is one of them that have not yet been returned to China. And so China sees itself as having a historical mission to reclaim its place in the region. A place is lost because of Japanese invasion, because of US invasion in the region over the years. So what we're seeing here really is that kind of tension rising largely in the Chinese, in the Southeast Asian region. China is reasserting itself there. We see, for example, with the building of the South China islands that they're doing there, they take some small little sand islands and they try to build them up into naval bases or some kind of full-fledged military base. And that is, and they claim territorial sea, they claim economic zone around these areas and so on, to the annoyance of the neighboring countries. That is creating quite a stir. And so that has stirred up a lot of the conflict with the United States. In addition, you have the fact that Americans have been difficulty competing with China technologically. I recently looked at a piece where the author was claiming that the China is going to be a dominant technological power. If you look at what they're doing in artificial intelligence, robotics, genome, and a whole series of areas. You see where they're leading in these areas of research. And just to see how far they have come in such a short space of time and what they're doing in terms of innovation, you can't help but feel that in a few years, technologically, they're going to surpass the West. Some people tend to question this, saying that China is highly controlled capitalism, and state capitalism doesn't facilitate innovation and development and so forth. But I tend to neglect that because the Chinese people have a way of working in a collective way which Western people don't fully understand. They will work as a society for the betterment of China in a collective way which you can't get Western countries to work for. Western countries are basically motivated by the market, whereas in China, they're not fully motivated by that. So that there's no doubt in my mind that rivalry between China and the United States is going to increase. And what we all seem to want is some kind of negotiation to seriously begin between China and the United States to try to regulate this competition. Now, some people say we could have competition, we could have cooperation, and we could let adversity stay where it is and just freeze it and manage it. Let's not forget that China needs the United States just as the United States needs China. The United States needs China to help it regulate some problems as in North Korea. It needs China on the climate issues. For instance, you can't solve the climate problems of the world without cooperating with China. They need China and also in terms of building global infrastructure and helping the developing countries, especially to come out of this pandemic crisis and so on. China gives a fair amount. And you need China on board in any program to try to revive the emerging countries and assist the developing countries. So there's a lot of room for negotiation, a lot of room for cooperation. Some rivalry will take place. What seems to be happening is that they're trying to delimit the areas in such a way as to avoid any major conflict. And this is the impression I get. Certain very key strategic areas where they think that they cannot allow Chinese investment in the United States or American investment. See them coming out now and trying to block this investment. And is American investment going to Chinese companies or Chinese companies investing in the United States? So there's that kind of action taking place to try to demarcate the limits in order to try to restrict the power of your enemy, so to speak. Now, I haven't said much about Russia. Russia is not an economic power. Russia is very weak economically, but Russia has nuclear weapons. It has a whole arsenal of weapons. And it is in a dangerous position in terms of the massive size of land it controls, certain key resources it has, like oil and gas, which it could use effectively to gain power. But the fact of the matter is that Russia is coming with a kind of historical grievance of having lost, as you said, the Soviet Union collapsed, and they feel pushing to come on their borders. And that has been a historical thing with Russia. And going back way when before the Tsars, or even after the Tsars, the Russians always feel that the Western powers are trying to divide Russia. They're trying to carve off parts of Russia. And there's some justification for this in history, with the Western powers invading certain areas, trying to half off certain parts of Russia in order to get the West more influence. So they see, for example, the East had left the Soviet bloc, and they went after 1992, they became independent. They see them going towards the European Union and towards NATO, and bringing NATO right on their border. So all that you see is happening there in Ukraine is a reaction to that, and we have to be careful. We don't know where that may go. I tend to feel that there's scope for negotiating it. I don't think it's Russian interest to go in there, but one never knows. You're dealing with personalities and with strong grievances, and the advantages of being a first mover and so on. But it's creating a tremendous amount of political tension and military tension in that part of the world. And we just have to hope that there's some kind of solution would be found. But there's a lot of diplomacy taking place to deal with it, and we're going to hope that something will be resolved. But on the broader picture of a China-US Cold War, which people talk about, it's not really reached to the intensity of a Cold War, although the Chinese United States is trying to frame it that way. For instance, the recent Biden summit on democracy, the Chinese tend to feel that this is a way of framing this thing as a Cold War, which has to do with democracy versus authoritarian regime. So you put China as an authoritarian regime, and you try to mobilize the democracies against China. So there's that Cold War element in that. But you're still to see, a very well formulated Cold War policy coming from under Trump. There was some concern when he sent his emissaries to tell countries not to deal with China, not to buy 5G from China and other strategic equipment, and also not to give China investment in certain key strategic materials. Things might be oil or gas or cobalt, for example, in Africa, and things like that. So there's that. Yeah, Biden hasn't pushed that with the same strength. So we're still waiting to see how that will pan out. But it takes I think good diplomacy to try to bring that together. Certain diplomats in the United States and certain top-ranking officials do not share this view of a Cold War. Many of them think that there's scope for accommodation with China. Remember that China has not been pushing any kind of strategic rivalry outside its region. Okay, if for instance you take China, they're next door in Venezuela, but if they get kicked out tomorrow, they go out. They want interested in some raw materials, and they're using the diplomacy to secure that. But they're not looking to mass put in a lot of strategic weapons and a lot of such military bases and various things to try to secure that. So they're not competing in that sense. Unlike other powers who, when they move into a region, they back that up with military bases, aircraft, military aircraft, and naval ships and so forth. If you take the United States alone, the United States, I think, have about 163 military bases across the world in Latin America, Africa, Europe, and Asia, and so on. That is massive outreach. I mean, here we're talking about a power that stretches itself and projects power around the world. But we haven't seen that from China, and I doubt the Chinese want to spend its resources in that. I don't think they see any value in that. So I believe that there's scope for regulation. I think one has to acknowledge certain things. You can't deny that Taiwan belongs to China, which is something that Nixon and Kissinger did.
Let me just jump in here.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to take a break now, but I want to ask you a question before we break, and we can talk about it when you come back. In the relationship between China and the United States, a big issue is Taiwan and what can I say, the logistical value to China and the United States of the South China Sea. And the second one, in terms of Russia, is the issue of Ukraine and the fact that Ukraine wants the option of becoming part of NATO, and Russia sees that as a problem. And the United States is pushing back on that particular issue. And you also have a situation in which not just the Chinese and the Russians are in Venezuela, but the Russians are all over the hemisphere. China is all over the hemisphere, mostly in matters that are economic. But Russia has been here in this hemisphere ever since the emergence of Castro in Cuba. And you have new players that you mentioned. One is Iran, Turkey, etc., also present in Venezuela and with interests in the hemisphere for various global strategic reasons, having to do maybe with United Nations ambitions and things like that. Now, I want you to think about that a little bit and to talk about what are the implications of these kinds of discussions and tensions in relation to Venezuela and the Western Hemisphere and the pushback of the United States against these countries and China and Russia's pushback against the United States, and what is likely to be the implications for this particular hemisphere and what has been transpiring here, let's say, over the last 20 years. We break now for commercials. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. I am Bo Tiwari, and we are talking to Professor Anthony Gonzales, former head of the Institute of International Relations at UWI.
Welcome to Lifetime Solutions, where you can trust your roof to us. Our services include custom fabrication, steel framing, roofing installation, on-site roll forming, roofing maintenance and services. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionst.com. Lifetime Solutions. You can trust your roof to us. Call 223-ROOF or 223-7663 for a quote today, or visit our website www.lifetimesolutionstt.com.
As businesses adapt to the new normal, let Magic Mist take care of your cleaning and sanitization needs with our COVID-19 BSCAI internationally certified technicians. With over 43 years of protecting the health of our nation, you can trust us to ensure your building remains safe, healthy, and functional. Give us a call today at 638-6675 or 332-5522. Magic Mist Services Limited, your total facilities management solutions provider.
Welcome back. This is Brighter Morning with Bo. I'm Bo Tiwari on MCTV, Multicultural TV, and our guest this morning talking about important matters having worldwide implications, but also implications for the hemisphere and for the region, is Professor Anthony Gonzales. Anthony, I asked you a question before we left about the detente over what you might call Taiwan and Ukraine and its implications for Venezuela, where China and Russia are also present, and the fact of their presence as well, increasing presence, I might add, in the Western Hemisphere. this hemisphere in which we live, which the United States sees as sort of its backyard, but in a way has really become its front door. So I wanted to get your take on how you see this thing evolving.
Yeah, well, first of all, on the Taiwan issue, I think America is in a very vulnerable position with respect to Taiwan. America is not in a position to really defend Taiwan, as I see it. America has accepted that Taiwan was part of China. That was the agreement with Nixon. And the whole idea was progressively over time that Taiwan would integrate into China. Now, if you look at the rapport, the force, if you look at the balance of forces in the area, you see where basically the Chinese have a predominance of military strength vis-a-vis Taiwan. They're just a few miles offshore there. They have a massive buildup of aircraft and naval assets and so forth. And they keep going into the Taiwan airspace just to demonstrate their superiority and to telling the United States they can take this anytime they want it. You see, so, and to say that they're going to come to the help of Taiwan. They never would say, as in the case where NATO is concerned, that if Taiwan is attacked, they would come to the defense of Taiwan. They would never say that because they know that they're not going to go to war for a country like Taiwan. On the other hand, the Chinese have been exercising some restraint. They have refused to invade Taiwan and take it, although they could do it. And instead, they have been trying to, they say they can wait. You know, once Taiwan shows that it is on a long-run path to integration with China, with something like what occurred with Hong Kong, but not exactly the same way. But they want to see the parties in Taiwan commit themselves to some kind of long-term integration with China. They understand that, okay, Taiwan has functioned as a separate country. Maybe they can do as they did with Taiwan, as a sort of separate autonomous one system, and but be part of the Chinese kingdom, as they say. So they hope they can negotiate on that basis once it is clear that, look, there's this pathway towards Taiwan becoming part of China down the road. So that is where the negotiation is on this question of Taiwan. Nobody wants a war, but nobody can say a war would not take place because of all the uncertainty that surrounds those negotiations. And then you have the people coming to power in Washington. Some are hawks, some are doves, some want to push back harder on China, some want to negotiate with China. So in all that context, you have this kind of uncertainty taking place. Now, as regards Russia, it's clear that Russia is going to push back very strong with respect to Ukraine becoming a member of NATO. It has said that very clearly. It wants to be sure that the former Soviet Union countries, all these Eastern European countries, Latvia and all of them, Poland, all of them, no more of them go into NATO and bring American troops or bring Western troops on the Soviet borders. They see that as a deliberate threat towards the territorial integrity of the Soviet Union. And that's a genuine concern, although many people tend to think, well, why worry with these buffers? You see, the Russians have a psyche which tells them that, that have come into Russia, have come through these territories, all the German invasions and so forth. You check back on it historically, it's correct. You've come through Poland and all these countries into Russia and caused tremendous devastation. So they still have this idea that, look, unless we keep these buffers here, we're still likely to see these invasions coming, which could totally destroy the Russian Federation. So they're obsessed with it.
We are coming to the end of the interview now because we have to break for the news. I wonder if you can get into now Venezuela and the Western Hemisphere from where you are and speak to that in the last few minutes that you have. Okay.
Well, quickly, China is not that important in this part of it, although they give a significant amount of loans to the Venezuelan government. Russia is more important because they supply the weapons and a lot of the political support, and along with the Cubans. So some kind of respect to Ukraine could ease the tension somewhat between the United States and Venezuela and Russia with respect to Venezuela. Now, remember that this has a kind of independent behavior of its own. That is to say that the forces, a lot that are driving things between Venezuela and the rest of the hemisphere, and Venezuela and the United States, they are coming from internal things that are taking place in Venezuela. I think the Americans could have stayed so long behind the Venezuelan government. They felt that by now the army probably would have crashed. And they felt that by bringing the economy down to its knees, the whole system would have crashed. And, Venezuela, the army would have revolted, and they would have probably driven out the Russians and Maduro and so forth. It has not happened, and it may not happen at all, as far as I see the way Venezuela is evolving. So they have to deal with Venezuela. And they can't, it's not like the old days where you would send the Marines into Venezuela, and you'll be able to run over the country. Today's world, you can't do that not because of the United Nations and the OS and all of that, but actually because militarily, you cannot secure these places. America cannot secure Venezuela in any kind of military invasion. They would probably run in and take the place in a few days, but how would they hold it? All these new tactics in asymmetrical warfare and so forth would mean that they would be bogged down in there for years, and their fighting would go on, up in the same kind of Iraqi situation, which they're trying to avoid, which they have just run from it in
Afghanistan.
Yes. So the idea is you have to try to settle for negotiation, which you have to try. And I see there's a negotiation process going on, and Europeans tend to be leading it. I think Biden more or less has handed it to the Europeans. And they seem to be coming to some understanding. Some relaxation is taking place in some areas, like the Electoral Commission. They had recent elections where free and fair, but you had observers coming from other parts of the world, and you had opposition candidates within certain areas. They also have, remember, the opposition is also very divided, and the opposition was given a fair amount of representation in the Electoral Commission. So things are moving in Venezuela in a kind of piecemeal way. I think the major players, in a way, never avoid any kind of war or proxy war, which could be dangerous for all. So my feeling is that a lot depends on the group in power in Venezuela, and that they will more or less judge the extent to which they want to go further, or go on a line with foreign powers to really cause further tension in the hemisphere.
All right, we are going to have to close up now, Professor Gonzales, because we are at 8 o'clock and we've got a break for the news with Andrew Chan. I want to thank you very much for your wide-ranging discussion this morning. It is worth a follow-up discussion, so we will see. All right, This is Brighter Morning with Bo. We've been talking to Professor Anthony Gonzales of the Institute of International Relations, from where he retired. And this is MCTV. Until tomorrow, which will be my last day this year, this is Brighter Morning with Bo. Look forward to talking to you tomorrow.